Welcome back. It's episode 14.1. It goes with episode 14. We're going to make earrings that will match the fat donut viking cage, but we're going to do it with much smaller donuts. These are 20 millimeter donuts, and the smaller wire, 22 gauge wire. We're going to hopefully make a matching pair. And we're going to get back into UFO conspiracy theories. We're going to pick up where we left off on the Wikipedia article. I'm not even sure we're going to finish this article in this episode. So let's get started. Carl Allen and the Philadelphia Experiment. In 1955, Morris K. Jessup achieved some notoriety with his book, The Case for the UFO, in which he argued that UFOs represented a mysterious subject worthy of further study. Jessup speculated that the UFOs were exploratory craft of solid and nebulous character. Jessup also linked ancient monuments with prehistoric superscience. In January 1956, Jessup began receiving a series of letters from Carlos Miguel Allende, later identified as Carl Meredith Allen. Allende warned Jessup not to investigate the levitation of UFOs and spun a tale of dangerous experiment in which a Navy ship was successfully made invisible, only to inexplicably teleport from Philadelphia to Norfolk, Virginia, before reappearing back in Philadelphia. The ship's crew was supposed to have suffered various side effects, including insanity, intangibility, and being frozen in place. By 1975, the Philadelphia Experiment was being promoted by paranormal author Charles Berlitz. In 1984, the legend was adapted into a fictional film. In 1957, Jessup was invited to the Office of Naval Research, where he was shown an annotated copy of his book that was filed with handwritten notes in its margins, written with 3 different shades of blue ink, appearing to detail a debate among 3 individuals. They discussed ideas about the propulsion of flying saucers, alien races, and expressed concerns that Jessup was too close to discovering their technology. Jessup noticed the handwriting of the annotations resembled the letters he received from Allen. 12 years later, Allen would say that he authored all of the annotations in order to scare the hell out of Jessup. The Jessup book with Allen scribbled commentaries gained a life of its own when the Barrow Manufacturing Corporation of Garland, Texas, who did contract work for ONR, began producing mimeographed copies of the book with Allen's annotations and Allen's letters to Jessup. These copies came to be known as the Varro edition. This became the heart of many Philadelphia Experiment books, documentaries, and movies to come. Over the years, various writers and researchers who tried to get more information from Carl Allen found his responses elusive or could not find him at all. Al Chop and the True Story of Flying Saucers. In 1956, Hollywood producer Clarence Green collaborated with Air Force Public Information Officer Albert M. Chop, who was in charge of answering UFO questions. When Chop told Green about the existence of film footage of UFOs, Green obtained the footage for analysis and display in his documentary. The documentary includes recreations of the Kenneth Arnold UFO sightings, the Mantell UFO incident, and the Gorman dogfight. Project Sign and Project Blue Book, the Air Force studies of the UFO phenomenon, are discussed. Although initially a UFO debunker, Chop comes to believe that UFOs are unknown and possibly extraterrestrial aircraft. Chop interviews German rocket scientist, formerly of Penniman's V-2 program, working for Americans who support the possibility that UFOs exist. The documentary analyzes 2 famous pieces of UFO footage: the Mariana UFO incident of 1950, the 1952 UFO film taken near the Great Salt Lake in Utah by U.S. Navy photographer Delbert Newhouse. The documentary concludes with the famous 1952 Washington, D.C. UFO incident, and Chop stating his beliefs that UFOs are real, physical phenomenon of unknown origin. Edward Ruppelt and the Report on Unidentified Flying Objects. Ruppelt was a captain in the U.S. Air Force who served as Director of Official Investigations into UFOs, Project Grudge and Project Blue Book. In 1956, Ruppelt authored the Report on Unidentified, book that has been called the most significant of its era. The book discussed the twinning memo, which initiated UFO investigation, and the rejected 1948 estimate of the situation. Ruppelt criticized the Air Force's handling of UFOs investigations. Historian Curtis Peebles concluded that the book should have ended the speculation about an Air Force cover-up. In fact, Ruppelt's statements were converted into support for the cover-up idea. Gray Barker and the Men in Black. 1956 saw the publication of Gray Barker's They Knew Too Much About Flying Saucers, the book which publicized the idea of men in black who appealed to UFO witnesses and warned them to keep quiet. There has been continued speculation that the men in black are government agents who harass and threaten UFO witnesses. According to the Skeptical Inquirer article, Gray Barker, my friend, the mythmaker, there may have been a grain of truth to Barker's writings on the men in black, and that the government agencies did attempt to discourage public interest in UFOs during the 1950s. However, Barker is thought to have greatly embellished the facts of the situation. In the same Skeptical Inquirer article, Sherwood revealed that in the late 1960s he and Barker collaborated on a pre-fictional notice alluding to the men in black, which was published as a fact first in Raymond A. Palmer's Flying Saucers magazine and some of Barker's own publications. In the story, Sherwood, writing as Dr. Richard H. Pratt, claimed he was ordered to silence by the black men after learning that UFOs were time-traveling vehicles. Barker later wrote to Sherwood, evidently the fans swallowed this with a gulp. 1960s. Throughout much of the 1960s, atmospheric physicist James E. McDonald suggested via lectures, articles, and letters that the U.S. government was mishandling evidence that would support the extraterrestrial hypothesis. Jacques Vallée and the Pentacle Memorandum. In June 1967, researcher Jacques Vallée was tasked with organizing files collected by Project Blue Book. Investigator J. Allen Hynek. Among those files, Vallée found a memo dated 9th of January 1953 addressed and assistant of Edward J. Ruppelt, an Air Force officer assigned Blue Book. The memo was signed H.C. Cross, but Vallée elected to refer to the author under the pseudonym Pentacle. The memo referred to a previously unknown analysis of several thousand UFO reports, along with calls for agreements about what can and what cannot be discussed. With the 1953 Robertson panel, writing in his 1967 journal, Vallée expressed the opinion that the memo, if it were published, would cause an even bigger uproar among foreign scientists than among Americans. It would prove the devious nature of the statements made by the Pentagon all these years about the non-existence of UFOs. 1970s. The Memorandum documentary and the landing at Holloman Air Force Base. Clark cites a 1973 encounter as perhaps the earliest suggestion that the U.S. government was involved with ETs. That year, Robert Eminger and Alan Sandler of Los Angeles, California, were in contact with officials at Norton Air Force Base in order to make a documentary film. Eminger and Sandler report that the Air Force officials, including Paul Shartle, suggested incorporating UFO information in the documentary, including as its centerpiece genuine footage of a 1971 UFO landing at Holloman Air Force Base in New Mexico. Furthermore, says Eminger, he was given a tour of Holloman Air Force Base and was shown where officials conferred with aliens. This was supposedly not the first time that the U.S. had met with these aliens, as Eminger reported that his U.S. military sources had been monitoring signals from an alien group with which they were unfamiliar. And did their ET guest know anything about them? The ET said no. The documentary was released in 1974 as UFOs, Past, Present, and Future, narrated by Rod Serling, containing only a few seconds of the Holloman UFO footage, the remainder of the landing depicted with illustrations and reenactments. In 1988, Shartle said that the film in question was genuine and that he had seen it several times. In 1976, a televised documentary report, UFOs, It Has Begun, written by Robert Eminger, was presented by Rod Serling, Burgess Meredith, and Jose Ferrer. Some sequences were recreated based upon the statements of eyewitness observers, together with the findings and conclusions of governmental, civil, and military investigations. The documentary uses a hypothetical UFO landing at Holland Air Force Base as a backdrop. Ebenezer's 1973 depiction of the landing at Holloman is widely noticed for its striking similarities to Steven Spielberg's 1977 depiction of landing at Devil's Tower in the film Close Encounters of the Third Kind. In the 2013 documentary Mirage Men, UFOologist Richard Dolan discussed the Ebenezer documentary, saying, "I have wondered if that film, I think as many people have wondered, was an abortive attempt at some kind of disclosure." J. Allen Hynek and Cosmic Watergate. J. Allen Hynek was an American astronomer who served as a scientific advisor to UFO studies undertaken by the U.S. Air Force under three projects: Project Sign, 1947-49, Project Grudge, 1949-51, and Project Blue Book, 1952-69. Hynek had drawn ridicule for his most famous debunking, in which he suggests a mass sighting over Michigan may have been caused by swamp gas. By 1974, the former skeptic was publicly charging that Blue Book was a cosmic Watergate. Hynek claimed 20% of Blue Book cases were unexplained. Fellow ufologists like Stanton Friedman echoed Hynek's cosmic Watergate accusations. Alternative 3 and a secret space program. Jerome Clark comments that many UFO conspiracy theory tales can be traced to a mock documentary, Alternative 3, broadcast on British television in June of 1977, but intended for April Fool's Day, and subsequently turned into a paperback book. According to the fictional research presented in the episode, it was claimed that missing scientists were involved in a secret American-Soviet plan in outer space, and further suggested that interplanetary space travel had been possible for much longer than was commonly accepted. The episode featured a fictional Apollo astronaut who claims to have stumbled on a mysterious lunar base during his moonwalk. It was claimed that scientists had determined that the Earth's surface would be unable to support life for much longer due to pollution, leading to catastrophic climate change. Physicist Dr. Carl Christine, played by Richard Marner, claimed to have proposed in 1957 that there were three alternatives to this problem. The first alternative was the drastic reduction of the human population on Earth. The second alternative was the construction of vast underground shelters to house government officials and a cross-section of the population until the climate had stabilized. The third alternative, the so-called Alternative 3, was to populate Mars via a way station on the Moon. The final moments of the film feature the discovery of animal life on the surface of Mars. Paul Binowitz. The late 1970s also saw the beginning of a controversy centered on Paul Binowitz of Albuquerque, New Mexico. 1980s. Jesse Marcel and Roswell conspiracy theories. In February 1978, UFO researcher Stanton Friedman interviewed Jesse Marcel, the only person known to have accompanied the Roswell debris from where it was recovered to Fort Worth, where reporters saw material that was claimed to be part of a recovered object. Marcel's statements contradicted those he had made to the press in 1947. In November 1979, Marcel's first filmed interview was featured in a documentary titled UFOs Are Real, co-written by Friedman. The film had a limited release but was later syndicated for broadcasting. On February 28, 1980, sensationalist tabloid The National Enquirer brought a large-scale attention to the Marcel story. On September 20, 1980, the TV series In Search Of aired an interview where Marcel described his participation in the 1947 press conference. They wanted some comments from me, but I wasn't at liberty to do that, so all I could do was keep my mouth shut. And General Ramey, as the one who told the newsmen, what it was, and to forget about it. It's nothing more than a weather observation. Of course, we both knew differently. Marcel gave a final interview to HBO's American Undercover, which aired August 1985. In all his statements, Marcel consistently denied the presence of bodies. Between 1978 and the early 1990s, UFOs researchers such as Stanton T. Friedman, William Moore, Carl Falk, and a team of Kevin D. Randall and Donald R. Schmidt interviewed several dozen people who claimed to have had connection with the events at Roswell in 1947. In the 1990s, the U.S. military published true reports disclosing the true nature of the crashed aircraft, a surveillance balloon from Project Mogul. Nevertheless, the Roswell incident continues to be of interest to the media, and conspiracy theories surrounding the event persist. Roswell has been described as the world's most famous, most exhaustively investigated, and most thoroughly debunked UFO claim. Gordon Cooper. By 1981, astronaut Gordon Cooper reported suppression of a flying saucer movie filmed in high clarity by two Edwards Air Force Base range photographers on May 3, 1957. Cooper said he viewed developed negatives of the object, clearly showing a dish-like object with a dome on top, and something like holes or ports in the dome. When later interviewed by James McDonald, photographers and other witnesses confirmed the story. Cooper said military authorities then picked up the film, and neither he nor the photographers ever heard what happened to it. The incident was also reported in a few newspapers such as the Los Angeles Times. The official explanation was that the photographers had filmed a weather balloon distorted by hot desert air. The Majestic 12. The so-called Majestic 12 document surfaced in 1982, suggesting that there were secret, high-level U.S. government interest in UFOs dating to the 1940s. Upon examination, the Federal Bureau of Investigation declared the documents to be completely bogus, and many UFOologists considered them to be an elaborate hoax. The term extraterrestrial biological entities, or EBEs, was used in the MJ-12 documents. Linda Moulton Howe and cattle mutilations. Linda Moulton Howe is an advocate for the conspiracy theories that cattle mutilations are of extraterrestrial origin. The speculations that the U.S. government is involved with aliens. George C. Andrews and Milton William Cooper. In 1986, conspiracy theorist George C. Andrews offered extraterrestrials among us, accusing the CIA of the Kennedy assassination. Anyway, citing Andrews as a source, in 1991, the UFO conspiracy author Bill Cooper published the influential conspiracy work Behold a Pale Horse, which claimed that Kennedy was killed after he informed Majestic 12 that he intended to reveal the presence of aliens to the American people. Behold a Pale Horse became wildly popular with conspiracy theorists and went on to be one of the most read books in the U.S. prison system. According to Michael Barkin, the theories of Andrews and Cooper helped create a conspiracist form of UFO speculation, which Jerome Clark refers to as UFOology's dark side. Bob Lazar. On November 1989, Bob Lazar appeared in a special interview with investigative reporter George Knapp on Las Vegas TV station KLAS to discuss his alleged employment at S4. To his interview with Knapp, Lazar said that he first thought the saucers were secret, terrestrial aircrafts whose test flights must have been responsible for many UFO reports. Gradually, on closer examination, and having been shown multiple briefing documents, Lazar came to the conclusion that the discs must have been of extraterrestrial origin. He claims that they use muscovium, an element that decays in a fraction of a second to warp space, and the gray aliens are from the Zeta Reticuli star system. According to the Los Angeles Times, he never obtained the degrees he claims he holds from MIT or Caltech. July 1989 MUFON Convention. I'm not sure I'm going to have enough time to finish this, so we'll see. The Mutual UFO Network held the 1989 annual convention in Las Vegas, Nevada, on July 1, 1989. The UFOologist Bill Moore was scheduled as the main speaker, and he refused to submit his paper for review prior to the convention. He also announced he would not answer any follow-up questions, as was common practice. Unlike most of the convention's attendees, Moore did not stay at the same hotel as that was hosting the convention. When he spoke, Moore said that he and others had been part of an elaborate long-term disinformation campaign, begun primarily to discredit Paul Bennewitz. My role in the affair was primarily that of a freelancer providing information on Paul Bennewitz's current thinking and activities. Air Force Sergeant Richard C. Doughty was also involved, said Moore. Though Moore thought Doughty was simply a pawn in a much larger game, as was I. One of their goals, Moore said, was to disseminate information and watch as it was passed from person to person in order to study information channels. Moore said that he was in a rather unique position in the disinformation campaign. Judging by the positions of the people I know to be directly involved in it, the disinformation definitely had something to do with national security. There was no way I was going to allow the opportunity to pass me by. I would play the disinformation game, get my hands dirty just often enough to lead those directing the process into believing I was doing what they wanted me to do, and all the while continuing to burrow my way into the matrix so as to learn as much as possible about who was directing it and why. Once he finished the speech, Moore immediately left the hotel in Las Vegas that same night. Moore's claims sent shockwaves through the small, tight-knit UFO community, which remains divided as to the reliability of his assertions. That's the end of that, well, it's not the end of that article, but thank you for hanging in there with me. If you want to read more about it, there's a little more to the article, and there's plenty of links to go off and explore new things. Thank you so much for hanging in there with me. Please like and subscribe, and I will see you in my next episode.